is now focused. The question being that where do Gazans go now? Is there any place that is safe for them at the moment?
In Gaza, no place in Gaza. Gaza is a small place. The whole territory of Gaza is very small. They have no electricity. They have no gas. They have no infrastructure. They are very, very little food, very little drinkable water. They have no medicines. They have nothing, and they are under constant attack by the Air Force of Israel. So there is no place to go. Some wounded people, a very little number of people is being allowed into Egypt. But Egypt don't have the infrastructure nor the resources to receive large quantity of people from Gaza. Egypt is not an option, only for a few hundred of the most critically injured people, etc., but not for the 2 million people that live in Gaza. They are trapped. They have nowhere to go. They have nothing right now. They are suffering a very big, harsh conditions without food, electricity, without medicine, without care,
yes,
without infrastructure, and they are on danger right now.
Yes, Mr. Alado. Now, the IDF in the latest has released a video just a few hours back. It shows a tunnel shaft near a school in northern Gaza. You are a former military officer as well, and we have spoken about the tunnel system. How difficult is it at the moment for the Israeli military to fight there?
Well, Israelis have overwhelming superior firepower. That Israeli is one of the most powerful and technological advanced militaries in the area and in the whole world, honestly. Small, but very, very capable. And they have the capability of cutting Gaza by a land corridor, and they have the capability of using satellites and using what we call ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance to follow all the movement of the Hamas fighters. They have signal intelligence capabilities to track all the emails or all text messages, all phone calls, or radio calls, etc. So they are extremely capable to do to destroy Hamas with overwhelming power. The problem again is that those 19,000 Gazan people from Hamas are surrounded by 2 million unarmed civilians, and those are the ones in danger. And Israel, honestly, the military, many military experts around the world are saying that Israel, despite of what they say, they are not really putting a lot of care on a lot of precautions in minimizing civilian casualties. That's the sad reality.
But Mr. Aldo, now there's also growing call on Israel to precisely define their goal from France to the United States of America, especially with the civilian casualties mounting. Can Israel actually precisely target its areas in southern Gaza while also reducing the civilian casualties at the moment?
Well, that is the key question. What are Netanyahu's, the Likud party, real intentions? What is the real objective? That is the big question that really nobody else knows but himself. But Netanyahu knows what his objectives are. The public objective that he's telling the press, that he's telling the media, is that he wants, obviously, revenge for the terrorist attacks, and he wants to destroy Hamas. That is the public objective. But people who knows the Likud party and people who knows the ultra-Orthodox religious parties that are part of Netanyahu's coalition, that we know that the real objective is not, or perhaps might not be that. The real objective perhaps will be to take control, permanent control of the whole Gaza area and destroy the peace process that the Labour Party did back in 2007 when they left the occupation of Gaza. And they destroy and they unoccupied the settlements, the Jewish settlements in Gaza. So perhaps what the Likud wants and the ultra-Orthodox parties want, that they are hardliners, is to use this as an excuse to have the final goal of taking full control, full occupation, permanent occupation of Gaza, just like it was before 2007.
Right, Mr. Alam, last question to you. With the for the families of the remaining hostages and the besieged Gazans. The fact that the truce has ended must have been a blow. What hope of any possible ceasefire? Because in the latest, Israel has recalled its negotiation team from Qatar.
Well, it's possible that there are more ceasefires in the future, but everything depends in what the United States of America, what Biden and the Biden administration tells Netanyahu to do. Netanyahu have very little. He cares very little about what the European Union said, what Spain said, or France says, or what Germany says, etc. He don't really care about the European Union at all. He only cares about what the Biden administration, what the United States of America tell him to do. So if the pressure, the international pressure mounts in the United States, mounts the internal, the left-wing party, the left-wing section of the Democratic Party, make a lot of pressure on Biden to stop the war for a few more days or for a few more weeks and make a ceasefire, then Biden is going to put Netanyahu on pressure. Biden is the only person in the whole world right now that can have or might have some kind of influence in what decisions Netanyahu does. Again, Netanyahu cares very little about what India says and very little about what the European Union says. He only cares about what Biden, about what the United States of America says right now.
Right, Mr. Aldo, but why is that?
Because the United States is the very big protector, the very big mentor, the very big defender of Israel. They give Israel billions of dollars every year in military aid. They give him political support. They give him military support. They give him protection in the United Nations. The permanent seat of the United States in the Security Council protects Israel. So Israel depends always, for the last 40 years, have been completely dependent, or for the 50 years, on the United States of America.
Right, Mr. Aldo. Thanks very much for joining us here on WION and sharing your insights with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And on to a continuous coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. In the latest, Israel and Hamas continue to trade fire. Both the sides have refused calls to extend the truce. Israel says it has pulled back mediators from Qatar, while Hamas says that another exchange of prisoners and hostages will only take place after permanent ceasefire. As we speak, relentless airstrikes continue to hit Gaza. Flares and explosions lit up the Gaza skyline as fighting stretched to the third day after the truce collapsed. At least 240 Palestinians have been killed as per Hamas since then. Rockets have also been fired from Gaza towards Israel. The Israeli officials say that hundreds and thousands were running for cover as sirens sound across central Israel on Saturday. Videos show how people are taking shelter for safety and Israel's Iron Dome defense system intercepting missiles above the city. Israeli army has meanwhile released video to show an alleged Hamas tunnel near a school in northern Gaza. The army said that the tunnel was 5 meters deep. They also released videos showing troops carrying out missions to neutralize infrastructure in what was said to be the area surrounding Jabalia in northern Gaza. While these are the scenes unfolding in Gaza, this is the scale of devastation both in southern and northern Gaza. The visuals on your screens are of Gaza City in the north and Khan Yunis in the south. Both of these cities have come under intense bombing since the fighting resumed. Well, families were seen fleeing their homes as they got struck by the Israeli strikes. And this is the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City. It has often been targeted by the Israeli forces since the beginning of the war. And dead bodies have been arriving here by truck, car and even horse-drawn cart. What you see at the moment is the devastation in southern Gaza. After 2 months of war, civil order is up for a toss. People have now resorted to loot 8 trucks that have been arriving in the territory. People were seen climbing on top of trucks, transporting humanitarian supplies in Gaza. As per reports, only 2 fuel trucks and 58 trucks were able to enter Gaza on Saturday. Israel says it has pledged to allow humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. However, it has urged civilians to evacuate to safe areas as it will continue hitting the targets in Gaza.
And so as soon as the fighting wraps up in northern Gaza, we will continue to destroy all of Hamas's terror infrastructure in Gaza so they can never again hurt our people. We've published an evacuation map, evacuation routes towards safe areas, and we're urging civilians to continue going to these areas, and we're committed to continuing to work with international agencies to ensure the continuation of humanitarian aid, of food, of water, of medicine and shelter to the people of the Gaza Strip.
While the attacks continue, Israel has started mulling post-war arrangements. A senior advisor has told Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that the country will seek a security envelope with special zones that will prevent Hamas from being positioned on its border after the war in Gaza is over.
So we have spoken that in the framework of the post-conflict relationships, Israel will have to have a security envelope. We can never again allow terrorists to cross the border and butcher our people the way they did on October 7th. And we can't take our eye off the ball. And so in a post-conflict reality, a post-Hamas reality, Israel will maintain for the foreseeable future overall security control.
Now, the truce between Israel and Hamas has come to an end early this morning. And today happens to be day 56 of this grueling, bruising war in which over 15,000 innocent Palestinian civilians have been bombed to their deaths. And what has happened since this morning, ever since Israel resumed its campaign of relentless bombing again, is that 109 Palestinians have been killed. Many are said to be women and children. After 7 days of a tenuous peace, hospitals in Gaza are again witnessing the same vulnerable condition. There are waves of wounded who are being brought into the hospitals, desperate for treatment, desperate to save those who are grievously wounded.
Medical teams could not bear the big number of patients that arrived to the hospitals of Gaza Strip as a result of pile-up of previous cases in the hospitals. Their departure to outside Gaza Strip is very slow. There are still hundreds of cases in the departments of all hospitals in Gaza Strip.
So as the war resumes, the question of course remains, have the mediators failed in extending the truce? And if they have failed, is Israel's intention to expand its ground offensive? As for the latest, the Israeli airstrikes have been reported across the enclave, including in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, which, remember, should have been a safe zone. The Israeli military has announced that it is dividing the entirety of the Gaza Strip into dozens of numbered blocks, and it has dropped leaflets onto Gaza with a QR code to a website with a map of all the areas and geolocating people within them. Israel knows the address and phone number of every resident in the Gaza Strip. Now, the innocent civilians are asking, after having gotten assurances and after having been repeatedly told to head to the south of Gaza, which was declared by the Israelis as a safe zone, why is the Israeli military now attacking them in a place that Israel had said was a safe zone?
We left from Al-Qara village to Khan Yunis, and all of a sudden, after the temporary truce, the Israelis came up with new orders telling us that people from Al-Qara, Habatan and Al-Faluja had to leave to Rafah. I mean from day one, from one place to other and another, from the north to the south, from the center, who knows where next. And there is no electricity, no water, no food, no good living conditions, and we are patient. And we are patient.
So even though the renewed offensive appears to be wide-ranging, what happens to the remaining hostages? What happens to those military personnel who had been abducted? Now, since the truce was announced, an extended Hamas member has freed at least about 110 captives, including 80 Israelis. In exchange, Israel has released about 240 Palestinian prisoners, including women and predominantly children, many of whom have been in Israeli prison for months without even charges being leveled against them. The prospect of Israel expanding its ground campaign southward has also heightened international anxiety, including in the White House, which has warned its close ally to moderate its military tactics to reduce civilian casualties and the depopulation that is being witnessed in the Gaza Strip.
In my meetings today with the Prime Minister and senior Israeli officials, I made clear that before Israel resumes major military operations, it must put in place humanitarian civilian protection plans that minimize further casualties of innocent Palestinians.
So with most Israelis supportive of a war that they see as essential to their own security, Netanyahu has always said that the war will restart with full force after negotiations had run their course. Hence, after a week in which diplomacy was given a bit of priority, violence in the Gaza Strip is once again the dominant part of what is unfolding in the Gaza Strip, where the campaign of relentless bombing has again begun. The ceasefire, which had lasted for 7 days, hung by a thread and it snapped yesterday morning. And immediately afterwards, Israel began its campaign of relentless bombings, and just in the last 24 hours, at least about 178 people have been killed, and scores of others have been very grievously injured. Now, at this moment, it is difficult to predict as to where this war is headed. Now, the United States, as it has always done, has backed the Israeli side, and it has said that Hamas is responsible for ending the ceasefire. Now, the Americans have blamed Hamas for the failure to produce a list of hostages that could have helped a further extension in the truce. Hamas, on the other hand, has accused Israel and the United States of having walked out of this ceasefire and of having resorted to this campaign of relentless bombings that has worsened the humanitarian catastrophe in the Gaza Strip.
يعني احنا نرجع الفشل للطرفين الإسرائيلي والأمريكي. الطرف الإسرائيلي يوم أمس بالليل كان واضح أنه هو يريد العودة إلى القتال. جرى طرح أكثر من فكرة من قبل الوسطاء. نحن تجاوبنا مع 3 أفكار منها، ورغم ذلك الإسرائيلي كان يقول لا 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 في كل مرة.
Now, Israel is vowed to carry on with achieving its goals in the Gaza Strip, but how it wants to do it is still not clear, because the only strategy that Israel has been using is to drop bombs on the Gaza Strip, resulting in worsening the humanitarian catastrophe and suffering of the Palestinian people. And also, the country's defense minister Yoav Gallant has told his Air Force fighter pilots that Hamas only understands force, and Israel will continue to bomb the Gaza Strip.
כפי שאמרתי מהיום הראשון, אני חוזר ואומר עכשיו, ארגון החמאס מבין רק כוח. אנחנו נמשיך ונכה אותו עד שנשיג את מטרות המלחמה. פירוק ארגון החמאס, שלילת יכולותיו הצבאיות והחזרתם של החטופים אל ביתם.
Israel has released a video showing its resumed operations in the Gaza Strip. It says that it has struck operational command centers in the enclave and also underground sites and a military compound since the truce ended. Now, Israel also claims to have eliminated certain Hamas strongholds within the Gaza Strip. But remember, what is happening at this moment is that Israel is carrying out bombings in some of the most densely populated areas in the Gaza Strip. There's no place that is safe in Gaza, and especially southern Gaza, where Israel had been exhorting all Palestinians to flee to for safety, has now come in the crosswires of the Israelis. The large parts of Khan Yunis city have been bombed with a campaign of intense bombardment that Israel has resorted to since yesterday morning. The scores of people have been killed in Khan Yunis. Many of them were rushed to the hospitals as they were injured very grievously in the strikes. They had to be pulled out virtually by hand from underneath the rubble. Now, Hamas has also released videos to show the launch of a few of its rudimentary drones that it has towards the Israeli army tanks in the Gaza Strip. Silent explosions were heard in Israel as some of these crude rockets that Hamas has got were fired from the Gaza Strip. Now, fighting has also resumed on the Israel-Lebanon border as well. The Israeli army has released a video to show the Israelis carrying out air bombings on certain targets that they claim were Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. According to the Lebanese state media, the Israeli shelling has resulted in deaths of 3 civilians in southern Lebanon immediately after the truce ended. Now, Israel has confirmed that 6 of the Hamas hostages are now dead. This is something that the Israelis have now come forward and said. Now, the army has not yet verified the death of the youngest hostage taken by Hamas, who was a 10-month-old baby, and also his family. Now, remember, Hamas had said that these Israeli hostages had been hidden in one of its tunnels, and they died because Israelis bombed that tunnel. Now, talking about the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, the White House says that it believes that Israel will allow for humanitarian aid trucks to enter into Gaza, but the number of deliveries will be reduced significantly. The United Nations, meanwhile, has said that the humanitarian aid delivery to Gaza is an unknown after the restart of the fighting.
It's kind of a unknown. Even before this pause, we were able to get aid in, to do whatever we can, but it just, when fighting is going on, it makes it that much more complicated, challenging, and most importantly, dangerous for those delivering the aid and receiving the aid.
And also to give us more perspective in terms of what is happening at this moment at the Gaza Strip, we're being joined by Professor John Blaxland, who is an international security expert and a professor in intelligence studies and international security, and is joining us live on the broadcast here. Now, Professor Blaxland, it's been 24 hours now since the fighting has resumed. The ceasefire, which had gone on for about 7 days, came to an end. Now, Israel says that its intention is to try wipe out Hamas, but it is doing so by dropping bombs in some of the most densely populated neighborhoods anywhere in the world. It has sparked a humanitarian catastrophe which is being made worse at this moment at the Gaza Strip. Does Israel actually have a strategy in achieving the objective that it claims that it wants to?
Yeah, look, good to be with you, and it is a shocking situation. It's devilishly difficult. Of course, we need to remember that this is largely an information war. While what we're seeing on the screens is about death and destruction, the effect that I think the Hamas has always sought is for this to kind of paint Israel as the ogre, as the bully, as the perpetrator of the violence, trying to make people forget what happened on October the 7th, and to rally the cause. Let's not forget Hamas prior to October the 7th was being completely marginalized. Saudi Arabia was on the cusp of doing a deal with Israel. They were almost completely isolated except for support they were getting from Iran and some moral support from Turkey. So this has been a game changer for Hamas. They have been very happy to, well, they've been prepared to see Palestinians sacrificed essentially for the cause, while the Hamas themselves have been hidden away. The hospitals have been used as shields. The resumption of violence is a direct consequence of them not being prepared to give more captives up for exchange for Palestinian detainees in Israel.
Professor Blaxland, if I can just interject there, but Israel also has a choice in terms of how it goes after Hamas. You know, what is interesting is that a lot of the top leadership of Hamas is not even present in the Gaza Strip. So if Israel wants to go after Hamas, it should go after Hamas with precision strikes. But what we are witnessing are these 2-ton bombs being dropped in places like Khan Yunis, and they are so densely populated, which is going to make things worse. The death toll is already well over 15,000. There are more than 6,000 children. Many of them do not even know that they are Palestinians who've been killed in this conflict. Is there something different that Israel, that is backed by the United States, can do?
So, look, I'm not sure that those numbers are quite correct. We get those figures from Hamas. Hamas, let's not forget, is a terrorist organization that is bent on actually not telling the truth. So we hear reports of Hamas states, and we hear reports that Israel alleges. It's very interesting the language that's used to accept what Hamas says at face value.
But we can at least accept what the United Nations is saying. The United Nations says that it is a humanitarian catastrophe that is playing out in the Gaza Strip.
It is a humanitarian.
The United Nations chief has said that Gaza has become a graveyard for children.
Yeah, but what is Israel's options? Let's be realistic here. Israel is facing a terrorist organization that is prepared, and it's continuing to repeat its line that it wants to exterminate the Israelis. Okay, what is it to do? It was in a situation where they were making some rapprochement with the Hamas people from Gaza Strip who were being employed in neighboring areas of Israel. That clearly has completely failed, and no one in the neighborhood is offering any help. So,
but Professor Flaxel, this brings back to the question that I started with. If I can just put the question again, the question that I asked was, can Israel resort to these pinpoint accurate strikes rather than resorting to strikes where there is enormous collateral damage? Collateral damage is a term that is used militarily for deaths of innocent civilians who've got nothing to do with this war.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, which is why you've got to ask yourself, why has Hamas allowed them to be there? Why has Hamas sought to control what they're doing and where they're doing it? Why has Hamas not continued its trade of detainees? Now, there's no question that you can challenge Israel for the scale of the bombing and the use of the particular precision weapons, but it's been clear, and a lot of security pundits around the world are acknowledging that, Israel faces a challenge where it either has to get rid of Hamas or it faces a repeat of this into the future.
Right.
And nobody is offering to help. Right. The United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Jordan, no one's offering a peacekeeping force to go in to help to hold the Gaza Strip and prevent Hamas from returning to office. So what is Israel to do realistically other than to pursue Hamas? Now, there's no question, you are completely right. The scale of the bombing is terrible. It is absolutely shocking. It's deeply disturbing for everybody. But this is a war. This is a war that Hamas wanted.
This is a war, one would assume, on Hamas and not on the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And one expects that Israel would use precision strikes to, in fact, target the Hamas leadership to begin with. That's the least that one expects here. But, Professor, thank you very much indeed for joining us with that perspective. We're completely out of time. And this is, of course, a discussion that, that we'll continue to have. But at this moment, what is happening in the Gaza Strip is a humanitarian
situation, but no one's offering seriously to help, mate. This is the problem. Israel is largely on its own here, which is getting some moral support from the United States and substantial support. But it is getting a pushback from many other countries, and none of them, there's faint praise from those who could actually come up with a solution. And that would be akin
Professor,
to what happened.
Professor, we're completely out of time. I think you've heard you say thank you very much indeed, sir, for joining us and getting us that perspective there.
International calls for a restraint in fighting are growing since the brief truce ended between Israel and Hamas. Well, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has now said that many civilians have been killed in Israel strikes in Gaza and that the humanitarian law must be protected. Take a listen.
We have been very clear about where we stand on this, which is innocent civilian lives should not be intentionally targeted, and that Israel must do more to protect innocent life in Gaza and innocent civilians in Gaza. And we've been very clear about that, and we continue to make that point, not only privately but publicly.
U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin also delivered some of his strongest remarks to date over Israeli actions in Gaza. He urged for the need to protect civilians as the intense fighting continues.
You see, in this kind of a fight, the center of gravity is the civilian population. And if you drive them into the arms of the enemy, you replace a tactical victory with a strategic defeat. So I have repeatedly made clear to Israel's leaders that protecting Palestinian civilians in Gaza is both a moral responsibility and a strategic imperative.
After these comments by senior U.S. officials, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that Israel has no desire to harm the population and that it is continuing to work in coordination with the U.S. and international organizations to define safe areas for Gaza civilians.
אנחנו קובעים כל הזמן בתיאום עם גורמים בינלאומיים וגם בתיאום עם ידידינו האמריקנים. אנחנו קווים אזורים בטוחים שהאוכלוסייה יודעת שהיא יכולה להתפנות לשם. עשינו את זה בצפון ואנחנו נעשה את זה גם בזירות אחרות. זה חשוב לעשות כי אין לנו שום רצון לפגוע באוכלוסייה. יש לנו רצון להימנע מפגיעה באוכלוסייה, יש לנו רצון עז מאוד לפגוע בחמאס.
Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. War has resumed in the Gaza Strip, and what this means is that the possibility of this war spilling beyond the borders of Israel and Gaza is very real. At this moment, a humanitarian catastrophe is sweeping through the Gaza Strip. More than 15,000 Palestinians have been killed, and over 70% of all casualties in the Gaza Strip are those of innocent women and children. But what is giving sleepless nights to a lot of geopolitical experts around the world is the very real possibility that the Houthis in Yemen could potentially shut down the Bab al-Mandeb choke point in the Red Sea to bring pressure on the Americans to rein in the Israeli onslaught. Our next report gets you more details. On the 19th of November, the world woke up to a hijack on the high seas. Armed men in fatigues rappelled down a helicopter and took over the crew of a cargo ship and altered its course towards the port city of Hodeidah. What has since become abundantly clear is that the Red Sea corridor is no longer a safe place of transit for ships owned by Israel or its allies. The 189-metre-long cargo ship called Galaxy Leader was operated by a Japanese crew and was carrying a Bahamas flag. Initially, Israel even tried to distance itself from the ship, but it soon emerged that the ship was linked to the Israeli billionaire Abraham Rami Ungar.
The Yemeni armed forces reiterate their warning to all ships affiliated with the Israeli enemy or those dealing with it that they will become legitimate targets for the armed forces and urge all countries whose nationals operate in the Red Sea to refrain from any work or activity with Israeli ships or ships owned by Israelis.
With the uneasy truce in Gaza having snapped, Israel has resumed its crippling bombardment of the Palestinian enclave. And what this means is that the Red Sea corridor, one of the most important shipping lanes in the world, going out of service for Israel is a very real possibility. The Houthi involvement in the Gaza war won't happen in the Gaza Strip. The strategic location of Yemen on the Bab al-Mandeb choke point means that the biggest escalation of the Gaza war outside the Palestinian territories will happen at the Bab al-Mandeb. The Bab al-Mandeb, which means the Gate of Grief, is a choke point that is just 20 kilometers wide between the Yemeni island of Mayoun to the coast of Djibouti and Eritrea. An estimated 18,000 ships pass through this stretch every single year, which means an average of 50 ships pass through these waters every single day. That is approximately 12% of the global trade must make its way through this narrow checkpoint, which the Houthis can disrupt in case of an escalation. Business analysts have already sounded an alarm at the global supply chains getting disrupted. According to Standard & Poor's Commodity Insights, the incident has already exposed Israeli tankers to high insurance rates. In the worst-case scenario, the disruption of this critical trade route can bring the United States and Iran into a direct confrontation. On the 9th of November, the Houthis published a video of shooting down the deadly MQ-9 Reaper drone along the Yemeni coast. The longer Israel's war in the Gaza Strip progresses, the more real becomes the possibilities of the Houthis trying to shut down the Bab al-Mandeb, potentially plunging the world supply chain into a tailspin. The war in Gaza has drowned out the bruising war in Ukraine from the public's imagination. But the fact is, Moscow's invasion of Ukraine is now in its 21st month. The battle lines are frozen. The Western support for Ukraine after the failed spring counter-offensive has created a sense of war fatigue. But there is a quiet realization that even with the best Western weapons, Kiev has been unable to push back the Russian troops. And now with the onset of winter, the Russians, it appears, are gearing up for their own winter offensive. Huliopol is one of the last frontline villages in Zaporizhia that is still under the control of the Ukrainians. Only those people who are too poor and who have nowhere else to go are the only ones who are still living here. Water is scarce, electricity is gone, and keeping oneself warm in the winter is a real struggle.
The missile hit and the walnut tree was smashed to pieces. The window was smashed too. The car was destroyed. I have chopped and dried the bits of wood and can use them now for burjuika stove.
In Novorovdivka, in the eastern part of Donetsk, 2 people were killed and at least 10 others were injured in a Russian missile strike. Ukrainian positions in Robotyne are being hammered by the Russian artillery. While cruise missiles launched from the Russian frigates in the Black Sea have been used to destroy Ukraine's military and energy infrastructure. What is unfolding at this moment is a build-up to a Russian winter offensive, for which Kiev is increasingly looking ill-prepared and ill-equipped.
The Russian group of forces are carrying out effective and powerful strikes against the Ukrainian army. As a result of this, their capabilities have been drastically decreased. Our servicemen act skillfully and decisively. They are taking better positions and are expanding their control in all directions.
The biggest backer of the Ukrainian war effort, the United States, is making all the right noises, but is not committing the necessary weapons where its mouth is.
Russia sought to destroy Ukraine's critical infrastructure, the energy infrastructure, and to deprive the Ukrainian people of access to heat and electricity at the coldest time of the year. Russia tried to break the will of the Ukrainian people, but of course it failed. As we head into yet another winter, we expect that Russia will return to this cruel tactic and again try to pursue a campaign to destroy Ukraine's critical energy infrastructure.
Publicly, NATO leaders have insisted that there is no other option than to back Ukraine. But reports have emerged in the German media of a potential secret plan for Ukraine, where the American President Joe Biden and the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz want to nudge Kiev to negotiate with the Kremlin. Faced with this waning support for its war, the big question is, how much longer can Ukraine hold out against the slowly tightening Russian onslaught? On the 2nd of November, the Russian President Vladimir Putin revoked Russia's ratification of the 1996 Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which is a global treaty banning nuclear weapons tests. The move sent alarm bells ringing. In an attempt to allay the fears, Moscow said that the revocation would not lead to a resumption of nuclear testing again. But it's also added a caveat. The United States, too, must refrain from nuclear testing. For the record, present-day Russia and erstwhile USSR had tested its last nuclear weapon on the 24th of October in 1990, while the United States' last nuclear test had been on the 23rd of September in 1992. In the backdrop of Russia's special military operation in Ukraine, the revocation has led to increasingly hostile rhetoric and also the arms control architecture that was built since Soviet Union's collapse more than 3 decades ago has now begun to unravel. How credible is the risk of a full-blown nuclear war, especially when viewed in the light of the deteriorating Russia-US relations? Perhaps it would be wise to listen to the voices of the people affected by these nuclear tests and learn from them.
About 450 nuclear tests were conducted between 1949 and 1989 on the barren steppe near the city of Semey, close to the Kazakh-Russian border. More than 100 of these tests were atmospheric, and the rest, post-1963, were conducted underground. The above-ground explosions, known as atmospheric tests, were in practice until 1963. Authorities used to order local people out of their homes and schools for any such detonations above ground, fearing that ground tremors might cause buildings to collapse.
I must have been a 5-year-old boy. I was very young. We have been told training was supposed to take place. At a certain point of time, leave the house and do not look towards Deligan Mountain. But we were young and curious, so we looked in that direction. First came a yellow flash and a black mushroom after it. The adults tried to drive us away.
The effect of radiation exposure was devastating on the environment and on the health of unsuspecting local people. Kazakh authorities estimate up to 1.5 million people were exposed to residual radioactive fallout from testing. What was their compensation? A certificate confirming their status as victims of tests, which made them eligible for an equivalent of a $40 monthly payout. Over 1 million people received such certifications. Some lost most of their family members to related diseases.
My father died when he was 58. Then my elder brother died, and my sister too. All of them died. We were children and knew nothing. Nobody dared to oppose the government then.
Though there is little reliable data available on the specific health impact of testing in Kazakhstan, scientists believe exposure to radioactive material on the ground, inhalation of radioactive particles in the air, and ingestion of contaminated food, including local livestock, did contribute to increased cancer risk and cases of congenital malformation. The damage wasn't just limited to regions exposed to direct radiation. Steppe winds carried the nuclear fallout across an area the size of Italy. A large portion of such territory is still considered too contaminated to inhabit or cultivate. At a time of rising risk of nuclear war, lending an ear to the sagacious voices would be a wise decision.
We are the people who have witnessed the consequences of the nuclear test site activity. If the countries resume nuclear tests, this is going to repeat itself. The population of the world would be killed. Let our sufferings teach others a lesson. It is necessary to convey our distress to other people. If this resumes, the humankind will disappear.
A 1963 treaty banned the nuclear weapons test in the atmosphere, in space or underwater. But the underground testing, too, poses serious environmental and health risks, besides the potential for contamination of groundwater. Most dangerous of all is the fact that the radioactive contamination lasts for generations. A momentary mistake could potentially impair generations to come. It's time the world paid attention.
In Myanmar, the ruling military junta is facing its biggest challenge since having seized power in a 2021 coup. An alliance of 3 Myanmar ethnic minority groups called the Brotherhood Alliance has waged coordinated offensive since the 27th of October. The offensive, named by the rebels as Operation 1027, signifying the date on which it began, has made some inroads into the junta-controlled areas in the northern Shan state, the Kaya state, and also in the Rakhine state in the west. Over 100 military outposts have been overrun. Trade routes to neighboring China have been cut off, and more than 330,000 people have been displaced since the offensive was launched. The Myanmar army so far has failed to mount a serious counter-offensive on the ground and is primarily relying on air and artillery strikes. Almost 200 civilians, including children, have been killed in these clashes. So what's happening in Myanmar at this moment? Our next report gets you the details.
Pokto is a principal town of Sitwe district in the Rakhine state of Myanmar, situated 25 kilometers from the state's capital. Pokta has become one of the key battlegrounds, with heavy battles being reported from in and around the town. Opening a new front in the offensive, one of Myanmar's ethnic minority groups, the Arakan Army, moved into Paukta on the 15th of November to regain control of the key town with a population of 20,000. The Myanmar military has carried out a sustained offensive involving fighter jets. For the past 2 weeks, military has been shelling Paukta from bases around Sittwe. According to the United Nations, 18,000 residents of the Paukta town have already fled. The Arakan Army is one of a dozen armed ethnic minority groups, battling Myanmar's military since independence from Britain in 1948. Last month, it joined forces with the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army and the Ta'ang National Liberation Army in an offensive against the junta across northern Shan state bordering China. Increasingly wary of conflicts in northern Myanmar spilling over the shared border, Beijing sent warships of the 44th Fleet to Yangon on the 27th of November, calling it a normal military exchange between the two sides.
This is a normal military exchange between China and Myanmar. Regarding China's position on the conflict in northern Myanmar, we have made clear repeatedly that we are closely following the conflicts in northern Myanmar. And we urge the relevant parties in Myanmar to cease fire as soon as possible, peacefully resolve their differences through dialogue and consultation, avoid escalation of the situation, and take practical and effective measures to ensure security and stability along the China-Myanmar border.
The China-Myanmar border is fraught with drug trafficking and people smuggling, a source of constant irritation for Beijing. China's People's Liberation Army conducted military exercises along its border with Myanmar on the 25th of November. The stated aim of the drills is to test the ability of troops to control and close borders and to strike with firepower should any emergencies arise. Reportedly, Myanmar's ruling junta were apprised about the military exercises. Beijing also urged its citizens to leave northern Myanmar as soon as possible and to stay away from the fighting. Earlier, Beijing had pledged to help resettle people who had crossed its border fleeing clashes in northern Myanmar.
Since the outbreak of fighting in northern Myanmar, some people from the Myanmar side have entered the Chinese side to escape the fighting. Out of humanitarianism and close friendship, the Chinese side has properly resettled the people from the Myanmar side who entered China to avoid the war and made every effort to treat the sick and injured.
Though unrest in Myanmar's border region has been a constant irritant, Beijing nevertheless backed the military junta who grabbed power in February 2021 from an elected government. How long will Beijing stand in Myanmar junta's corner? And what possible implications it might have on the groundswell of opposition backed by armed resistance? Only time will tell if the coordinated offensive proves to be a turning point in the history of Myanmar.
At least 19 people were killed and nearly 2,000 inmates escaped in Sierra Leone when the country's main military barracks and prisons were attacked on the 19th of November. The Sierra Leone government has characterized the Sunday's assault as a failed coup attempt which aimed to subvert and overthrow the government. Several countries in West and Central Africa are presently under military rule after a series of recent coups, including Sierra Leone's neighbor Guinea, as well as Mali, Niger and Chad. In Sierra Leone itself, the political situation has been pretty tense since June this year, after President Julius Maada Bio's re-election in a disputed vote. Our next report gets more details.
The West African nation of Sierra Leone is considered one of the poorest in the world. Its 8 million population is still healing from the ravages of an 11-year-old civil war that ended more than 2 decades ago. The impoverished nation was thrown into turmoil early Sunday morning when assailants sent gunfire ringing across the usually peaceful capital, Freetown. The early morning attack took both residents and security forces by surprise. Fears of a possible coup in the troubled region were raised as gunmen tried to break into the key armory of the country's largest military barracks, located near the presidential villa. Engaging the security forces in a 2-hour raid, the assailants targeted major detention centers as well, including the central prison, which holds more than 2,000 inmates. Some 1,890 inmates are believed to have escaped from the Pademba Road Central Prison after the assailants broke in. 23 of those prisoners have been nabbed and brought back. Pinning the blame on renegade soldiers, the government said the attack had been repelled.
The Sierra Leoneans. In the early hours of this morning, there was a breach of security at the military barracks at Wilberforce in Freetown. Some individuals attacked the military armory and other locations in Freetown, including Pademba Road Correctional Center. In the event, prisoners escaped. The attackers have been repelled by a combined team of gallant security forces, and calm has been restored.
Among the 19 who died included 13 soldiers, 3 assailants, a police officer, a civilian, and a person working in private security. Soon after the armory came under attack, an immediate national curfew was imposed and public were asked to remain at home. 13 military officers and a civilian have been arrested over the attempted coup. A tense calm returned to the streets of Freetown on Monday, though gunshots were fired on Tuesday as well in the Murraytown neighborhood.
The fire will take place.
After the firing that took place yesterday at Koso Town Junction, we came out and saw some bullet shells. These are some of the bullet shells, the empty shells, you can see them. Some of us have never experienced this until yesterday. We are praying for this not to repeat because this country belongs to all of us. If this continues, where are we supposed to go? Because we will not have this kind of peace in another man's country.
The police explained that it was part of the operation to nab perpetrators of Sunday's attack, many of whom were still hiding or on the run across the country. West Africa has witnessed a series of military coups and attempted coups since August 2020. Sierra Leone President Julius Maada Bio, who was first elected to power in 2018, was re-elected in June with 56.17% of the vote, barely over the 55% needed to avoid a runoff. The result was rejected by the main opposition, All People's Congress Party. Inconsistencies and lack of transparency in counting were condemned by international observers as well, including the United States and the European Union. And in August, a number of soldiers were arrested and accused of plotting a coup against the president. The attempted coup on Sunday, though thwarted, has deepened the political tension and cast an ominous shadow over the peace and security in the West African nation.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of World at War. And if you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, please feel free to do so on the ID that you're seeing on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.
It's day 2 since the truce collapsed between Israel and Hamas. Israeli military is constantly bombarding the besieged Gaza Strip. Over 200 have been killed in Gaza since the temporary ceasefire expired. The IDF has struck more than 400 targets across Gaza in just 24 hours of the truce expiring. These targets include both artillery and munitions from the aircrafts. Now, it says it struck operational command centers in the enclave, as well as underground sites and a military compound since the truce ended. It also said to have eliminated multiple terrorist cells throughout Gaza. The Israeli military has also asked people in the Palestinian enclave to evacuate certain regions of the south, hinting towards the expansion of the ground assault. The IDF says the Hamas militants are taking refuge alongside the civilians. Heavy and relentless airstrikes have been hitting Gaza. These are the visuals of Khan Yunis, a city in southern Gaza, which has also been on the target of Israel. Now, Gaza's hospitals are overwhelmed with a new wave of injured. Conditions have worsened in Gaza after the offensive resumed. Most of the victims are children and women. Within hours of collapse of the truce, the enclave reported 54 people killed by the Israeli airstrikes. A UNICEF global spokesperson described the situation of children in Gaza as he visited a hospital in the area.
Functioning hospital in Gaza. It's at 200% capacity. Yes, this is a hospital. The health system here is overwhelmed. This hospital simply cannot take more children with the wounds of war. There are children everywhere. These children are sleeping. There was a bomb literally 50 metres from here. I cannot overstate how the capacity has been reduced of hospitals in the last 7 weeks. We cannot see more children with the wounds of war, with the burns, with the shrapnel littering their body, with the broken bones.
Meanwhile, Hamas has released a video to show the launch of drones towards Israeli army tanks in Gaza. Sirens and explosions were heard in Israel overnight as rockets were launched from the Gaza Strip. Fighting has also resumed on the Israel-Lebanon border. Israeli army released a video to show army airstrikes and artillery fire targeting Hezbollah in Lebanon. As per Lebanese state media, Israeli shelling killed 3 people in South Lebanon after the truce ended. Meanwhile, Israel has confirmed that 6 of Hamas hostages are now dead. The army has not yet verified the death of the youngest hostage taken by Hamas, who is a 10-month-old baby, and also his family. Hamas had claimed the family was killed in Israeli strikes. Talking about the aid situation in Gaza, the White House says it believed Israel will allow humanitarian aid trucks to enter Gaza, but the number of deliveries will likely be reduced significantly. The UN, meanwhile, says that humanitarian aid delivery to Gaza is an unknown after the restart of fighting.
It's kind of a unknown. Even before this pause, we were able to get aid in, to do whatever we can, but it just, when fighting is going on, it makes it that much more complicated, challenging, and most importantly, dangerous for those delivering the aid and receiving the aid.
Israeli warplanes and artillery are bombarding the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Health Ministry says at least 193 Palestinians have been killed and 650 wounded since the truce ended on Friday morning, adding to the more than 15,000 Palestinian dead since the start of the war. Here's a report.
And also to give us more perspective in terms of what is happening at this moment at the Gaza Strip, we're being joined by Professor John Blaxland, who is an international security expert and a professor in intelligence studies and international security, and is joining us live on the broadcast here. Now, Professor Blaxland, it's been 24 hours now since the fighting is resumed. The ceasefire, which had gone on for about 7 days, came to an end. Now, Israel says that its intention is to try wipe out Hamas, but it is doing so by dropping bombs in some of the most densely populated neighborhoods anywhere in the world. It has sparked a humanitarian catastrophe which is being made worse at this moment at the Gaza Strip. Does Israel actually have a strategy in achieving the objective that it claims that it wants to?
Yeah, look, good to be with you, and it is a shocking situation. It's devilishly difficult. Of course, we need to remember that this is largely an information war. While what we're seeing on the screens is about death and destruction, the effect that I think the Hamas has always sought is for this to kind of paint Israel as the ogre, as the bully, as the perpetrator of the violence, trying to make people forget what happened on October the 7th, and to rally the cause. Let's not forget Hamas prior to October the 7th was being completely marginalized. Saudi Arabia was on the cusp of doing a deal with Israel. They were almost completely isolated except for support they were getting from Iran and some moral support from Turkey. So this has been a game changer for Hamas. They have been very happy to, well, they've been prepared to see Palestinians sacrificed essentially for the cause, while the Hamas themselves have been hidden away. The hospitals have been used as shields. The resumption of violence is a direct consequence of them not being prepared to give more captives up for exchange for Palestinian detainees in Israel.
Professor Blaxland, if I can just interject there, but Israel also has a choice in terms of how it goes after Hamas. You know, what is interesting is that a lot of the top leadership of Hamas is not even present in the Gaza Strip. So if Israel wants to go after Hamas, it should go after Hamas with precision strikes. But what we are witnessing are these 2-ton bombs being dropped in places like Khan Yunis, and they are so densely populated, which is going to make things worse. The death toll is already well over 15,000. There are more than 6,000 children. Many of them do not even know that they are Palestinians who've been killed in this conflict. Is there something different that Israel, that is backed by the United States, can do?
So, look, I'm not sure that those numbers are quite correct. We get those figures from Hamas. Hamas, let's not forget, is a terrorist organization that is bent on actually not telling the truth. So we hear reports of Hamas states, and we hear reports that Israel alleges. It's very interesting, the language that's used, to accept what Hamas says at face value.
But we can at least accept what the United Nations is saying. The United Nations says that it is a humanitarian catastrophe that is playing out in the Gaza Strip.
It is a humanitarian.
The United Nations chief has said that Gaza has become a graveyard for children.
Yeah, but what is Israel's options? Let's be realistic here. Israel is facing a terrorist organization that is prepared, and it's continuing to repeat its line that it wants to exterminate the Israelis, okay? What is it to do? It was in a situation where they were making some rapprochement with the Hamas people from Gaza Strip who were being employed in neighboring areas of Israel. That clearly has completely failed, and no one in the neighborhood is offering any help. So,
but Professor Blaxland, this brings back to the question that I started with. If I can just put the question again, the question that I asked was, can Israel resort to these pinpoint accurate strikes rather than resorting to strikes where there is enormous collateral damage? Collateral damage is a term that is used militarily for deaths of innocent civilians who've got nothing to do with this war.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, which is why you've got to ask yourself, why has Hamas allowed them to be there? Why has Hamas sought to control what they're doing and where they're doing it? Why has Hamas not continued its trade of detainees? Now, there's no question that you can challenge Israel for the scale of the bombing and the use of the particular precision weapons, but it's been clear, and a lot of security pundits around the world are acknowledging that, Israel faces a challenge where it either has to get rid of Hamas or it faces a repeat of this into the future.
Right.
And nobody is offering to help.
Right.
The United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Jordan, no one's offering a peacekeeping force to go in to help to hold the Gaza Strip and prevent Hamas from returning to office. So what is Israel to do realistically other than to pursue Hamas? Now, there's no question, you are completely right. The scale of the bombing is terrible. It is absolutely shocking. It's deeply disturbing for everybody. But this is a war. This is a war that Hamas wanted.
You know, this is a war, one would assume, on Hamas and not on the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And one expects that Israel would use precision strikes to, in fact, target the Hamas leadership to begin with. That's the least that one expects here. But, Professor, thank you very much indeed for joining us with that perspective. We're completely out of time. And this is, of course, a discussion that, you know, that we'll continue to have. But at this moment, what is happening in the Gaza Strip is a humanitarian
situation, but no one's offering seriously to help, mate. This is the problem. Israel is largely on its own here, which is getting some moral support from the United States and substantial support, but it is getting pushback from many other countries, and none of them, you know, there's faint praise from those who could actually come up with a solution. And that will be akin
Professor,
to what
we're
happened.
completely out of time. I think you've heard you say thank you very much indeed, sir, for joining us and getting us that perspective there.
Israeli forces are continuing to pound Gaza. Our country's military says it has carried out over 400 strikes on Gaza in the past 2 days. This time around, Israel's operation against Hamas is not only fixated on the northern region, but includes southern part of the besieged strip. After a 5-day lull, Israeli jets are again attacking Gaza. Israel's offensive has caused much death and destruction. Over 15,500 people have been killed in Gaza. Israel's Western allies, too, have cautioned against its aggression in the besieged strip. Israel's relentless strikes on Gaza have reduced many neighborhoods to rubble. Let's now look at Israel's armory. One of the most deadly munition used in this war are bombs known as bunker busters. Ever since Israel launched its ground offensive in Gaza on the 27th of October, bunker busters have been useful to obliterate underground targets. These busters penetrate the ground when dropped and are used to destroy Hamas's underground outposts. Now, moving on to Merkava. This has been the main battle tank used by the Israeli Defense Forces since the 1980s. Israel has been using this tank to guard the Gaza border. Merkava can carry a whole tank crew, including a commander, loader, gunner, and up to 8 infantry soldiers. Just days after Hamas's surprise assault on Israel, shipments of American weapons began arriving in Israel, which includes smart bombs, ammunition, and interceptors for Israel's famous Iron Dome missile defense system. Iron Dome is proved to be Israel's very own missile defense shield, which is known to have a 96% success rate in intercepting rockets. As per reports, Pentagon has ramped up military aid to Israel. Israel has turned to US for its twin turboshaft attack helicopter known as Boeing AH-64 Apache. America's most feared attack helicopter has a cockpit for 2, and its nose-mounted sensors come in handy to annihilate targets at night. Sources say that Israel has also requested for Switchblade 600 dive-bombing drones, also known as suicide drones. Ukraine has also purchased these drones, which represents the next generation of extended-range munitions. Switchblade 600 includes everything required to successfully plan and even execute missions, all within the span of 10 minutes. The push to supply more weapons to Israel comes as the US is already struggling to keep up with demand to resupply Ukraine in its war against Russia. As per reports, United States sends more military aid to Israel than any other nation since the 7th of October. US House of Representatives has approved an emergency military aid package to Israel worth over $14 billion.
Both Israel and Hamas are blaming each other for the breakdown of truce. The deal was mediated by Qatar, during which 110 hostages, which included 78 Israeli and dual nationals and people from other nationalities, were released. But what about the remaining hostages? The mediators are saying that the fighting is making it difficult to initiate the talks. Bombs are falling again on the besieged Palestinian enclave, causing concerns among the families of hostages about their safety. According to Israel, 136 hostages are still in captivity, including 17 women and children. And about 10 of the hostages are of 75 years of age or above. Among them are several Israeli soldiers too. Tensions are mounting as Israeli Defense Minister confirmed the death of 5 hostages. They were taken from kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th by the militant group.
בימים האחרונים, צה"ל יחד עם משטרת ישראל בישרו למשפחות של החטופים אליהו מרגלית, מיה גורן, רונן אנגל ואריה זלמנוביץ' על מותם. זאת לאחר שוועדת מומחים של משרד הבריאות, יחד עם המכון לרפואה משפטית, הרב הראשי לישראל ומשרד הדתות, קבע את מותם בעקבות ממצאים שנאספו ומידע מודיעיני מבוסס.
In addition to this, a group representing the hostages confirmed that a 6th hostage was killed in captivity. A sound engineer was taken as a hostage from the Nova festival. In Israel, the families of the hostages staged a silent protest. They are calling the Israeli government to hasten the process of bringing their loved ones back safe and sound.
Well, Itai was kidnapped from kibbutz Be'eri. His parents were murdered. He was with his mother while he was kidnapped. We know that he was taken to Gaza. Took some time until we got some indication about his condition. And we know right now that he's alive, but he's not in great condition. He's 38 years old, so he's not in the first list, and we need him back soon.
The fighting has also dimmed hopes for the Palestinian families who were hoping for the release of their near and dear ones. Activist groups say there are more than 7,000 Palestinians detained by Israel. It is not clear how many of the remaining women hostages are soldiers. Hamas is expected to demand the release of high-profile Palestinians convicted of deadly attacks, something Israel has strongly resisted in the past. A senior Hamas official says that they are ready to release all the Israeli soldiers it is holding captive in exchange for all Palestinian prisoners held in Israel.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Deadly fighting has resumed in Gaza after the brief 7-day truce ended on Friday. Hamas says at least 178 people are already dead since the ceasefire ended. Both sides have traded blames for breaching the truce terms. The United States has backed Israeli arguments that Hamas is responsible for ending the pause. It has blamed Hamas for its failure to produce the list of hostages that could have helped a further extension in truce. Meanwhile, Hamas has accused both Israel and the US.
يعني احنا نرجع الفشل الطرفين الاسرائيلي والامريكي. الطرف الاسرائيلي يوم امس بالليل كان واضح انه هو يريد العوده الى القتال. جرى طرح اكثر من فكره من قبل الوسطاء. نحن تجاوبنا مع 3 افكار منها، ورغم ذلك الاسرائيلي كان يقول لا 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 في كل مره.
Israel has vowed to carry on with achieving its goals in Gaza. Country's defense minister told his airmen that Hamas only understands force and they will continue and strike until Hamas is eliminated.
כפי שאמרתי מהיום הראשון, אני חוזר ואומר עכשיו, ארגון החמאס מבין רק כוח. אנחנו נמשיך ונכה אותו עד שנשיג את מטרות המלחמה. פירוק ארגון החמאס, שלילת יכולותיו הצבאיות והחזרתם של החטופים אל ביתם.
Israel has released videos showing its resumed operations in Gaza. It says it struck operational command centers in the enclave, as well as underground sites and a military compound since the truce ended. It also said to have eliminated multiple terrorist cells throughout Gaza. Now, parts of Gaza's southern city, Khan Yunis, have come under intensive bombardment as the deadline lapsed. Several had to be rushed to hospitals as they were injured in the strikes. Meanwhile, Hamas has released video to show launch of drone towards Israeli army tanks in Gaza. Sirens and explosions were heard in Israel overnight as rockets were launched from the Gaza Strip. Now, fighting has also resumed on Israel-Lebanon border. Israeli army released a video to show army airstrikes and artillery fire targeting Hezbollah in Lebanon. And as per Lebanese state media, Israeli shelling killed 3 people in South Lebanon after the truce ended. Israel has confirmed in the meanwhile that 6 of Hamas hostages are now dead. Army has yet not verified the death of the youngest hostage taken by Hamas, who's a 10-month-old baby, and also his family. Hamas had claimed that the family was killed in Israeli strikes. Now, talking about the aid situation in Gaza, the White House says it believed Israel will allow humanitarian aid trucks to enter Gaza, but the number of deliveries will likely be reduced significantly. UN, meanwhile, says that humanitarian aid delivery to Gaza is unknown after the restart of fighting.
It's kind of a unknown. Even before this pause, we were able to get aid in, to do whatever we can, but it just, when fighting is going on, it makes it that much more complicated, challenging, and most importantly, dangerous for those delivering the aid and receiving the aid.
Now, to get you more details on what the collapse of the truce may mean, we are being joined by Edward P. Joseph, who's a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins University and a foreign policy analyst. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Welcome to the broadcast, Mr. Joseph.
Good to be with you.
I'll begin with the renewed fighting in Gaza that has stretched into a second day on Saturday, and after talks extended, a week-old truce with Hamas collapsed. And what happens next?
Well, we see that Secretary of State Antony Blinken is doing his best to try to ensure that the situation does not revert to what we saw before. He did 2 things that was very important today in Israel. Number one, he made it very clear, as your introductory package showed, that Hamas is to blame singularly for the breakdown of the humanitarian pause. And he noted the terrorist attack in Jerusalem that killed 3 Israelis and stated that Hamas already had not fulfilled the agreed terms for the humanitarian pause, in addition to firing rockets before the pause had even ended. So he made that very clear. At the same time, he also made it clear to the Israelis that they have to do much better in terms of sustaining their operations, which the United States still backs. There's not any difference about that. The U.S. supports the intent to destroy Hamas and get rid of this virulent actor in Gaza. But according to Antony Blinken, he states, I made it clear that the amount of civilian casualties we had in the north can't repeat itself in the south. That is when Israel turns its attention, the military operation, to the south. And from the Israeli side, the indicators are that they understand that. And a senior military official in Israel indicated that the operation would be relying more on ground operations than it would on air, and that this would reduce civilian casualties. Please.
And Mr. Joseph, Qatar now says that it will persist in seeking a renewed agreement, but warned that the resumption of hostilities is complicating matters. Now, what do you think this renewed agreement would look like, if at all it comes into the picture?
It's hard to understand what the Qataris exactly have in mind. What they presumably want to do is to try to resurrect the terms that led to the initial hostage release, but that's very difficult here because, again, as Secretary of State Blinken made it unequivocally clear, it was Hamas that broke the terms. So from the Israeli side, there's already very clear that there's a breakdown here and a clear demonstration of what Hamas's intentions are. And the wider point here, Aditi, that I think people don't understand is the unity within Israel to, at this time, even despite serious concerns and even opposition to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And much of this, of course, stretches back to October 7th, which, of course, has been lost in the minds of so many protesters around the world who are, of course, understandably concerned about the death toll on Palestinians, including women and, above all, children. So that's what's been lost here. And what I would do, Aditi, as we don't have time, is simply turn your viewers' attention to the Twitter profile of a former U.S. Army officer, Alex Plitzas, who witnessed the video. This is a battle-hardened expert who has witnessed ISIS videos, Alex Plitzas, P-L-I-T-S-A-S, who saw yesterday the Hamas's own videos of what it did on October 7th. And he, Alex Plitzas, states that I can tell you unequivocally, having seen ISIS videos, that what I saw by Hamas was worse than the ISIS videos I've had to review in the course of my duties. And he goes on, Alex Plitzas, P-L-I-T-S-A-S, to say one of the more chilling and vile aspects of this Hamas attack that differs from videos I've seen of both al-Qaeda and ISIS atrocities is the maniacal laughter and the joy that the terrorists expressed while torturing and murdering unarmed civilians, to include women and small children. So see, this is what has been lost here in of course, the discussion of the understandable of the terrible death toll on Palestinian civilians, is that Hamas is not interested in liberation. It is interested in annihilation. And the United States understands that. Arab neighbors of Israel understand that. But it is the challenge for Israel to continue this military operation while minimizing the terrible toll that has been inflicted on Palestinian civilians, above all children. Please.
Mr. Joseph, speaking of challenges and complications, I would like to shift your attention now to the reports that have come in that Yemen's Houthi rebels had threatened to escalate their attacks while the ceasefire was on against Israel if ceasefire ends. And now there have been a lot of talks and incidents that point towards the war possibly turning into a multi-front war for Israel, and also the latest fighting on the Israel-Lebanon border that has resumed. Now, do you think the spillover is in the vicinity?
I think it's always a possibility. We know that. For the moment, we see that Hezbollah, which is the primary actor, not the Houthis in Yemen, they are already did a demonstration act by seizing a British vessel in the Red Sea. So they already demonstrated their intent to try to be part of the overall operation. But it is really Hezbollah that is the main actor. That's the party that has serious missilery, completely backed by Iran, which has projects its destabilizing influence in the Middle East through proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah. And so far, Hezbollah has backed off. Its leader, Nasrallah, has said that, indicated when he gave a big address, that they would not take this opportunity now to join in on behalf of Hamas. So they backed off. And the reason they backed off, Aditi, is because they're afraid that they will be pulverized by Israeli military if they get into an engagement and earnest conflict, direct conflict with Israel. And that will put them at disadvantage in Lebanon, where, of course, they are despised by other factions within Lebanon. So that's, for the moment, Iran and its proxy Hezbollah have been cautious about getting into a frontal conflict with Israel. Please.
Mr. Joseph, thank you for joining us and giving us all those insights. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
And also the significant development, Israel has communicated its intentions to the Arab states to establish a buffer zone along the Palestinian side of the Gaza border. This move is reportedly aimed at preventing future attacks as part of a post-war proposal. Now, citing the Egyptian and the regional sources, a Reuters report has now revealed that Israel has shared its plans with the Arab states. This includes Egypt, Jordan and the United Arab Emirates. Moreover, Saudi Arabia has also been informed despite not having any diplomatic ties officially with Israel. Even non-Arab Turkey has received the information about the proposed buffer zone where the Israelis want to push out the Palestinian people into. In response, none of the Arab nations have expressed any willingness to administer Gaza in any way in the future. There haven't been any official comments from these nations. Instead, most of them have in fact condemned Israel's offensive that has resulted in a humanitarian catastrophe where thousands of people have been killed, most of them women and children, children so young that they do not even know that they're Palestinians, and that is why they're caught in this mind-numbing war. Now, a senior regional security official explained the reason, and let's in fact quote that here. Israel wants this buffer zone to prevent Hamas or any other militant faction from infiltrating or attacking Israel. Meanwhile, the American Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has held discussions with the West Asian nations regarding the future of Gaza, this even after Israel resumed its attacks on the Palestinian enclave. The discussion covered the present state of the ongoing war and the kind of measures that are being taken to deliver aid into the Gaza Strip. Previously, these nations have repealed US's attempts to discuss a post-Hamas future for Gaza, arguing over the American demand for an immediate ceasefire.
It is the third day since the truce collapsed. Bombing continues in Gaza. Both Israel and Hamas have ruled out negotiations for now, as bodies line up in the Palestinian enclave. Israel says it has pulled back mediators from Qatar, while Hamas says that another exchange of prisoners and hostages will only take place after a permanent ceasefire. As we speak, relentless airstrikes continue to hit Gaza. Flares and explosions lit up the Gaza skyline as fighting stretched to third day after the truce collapsed. Over 240 Palestinians have been killed as per Hamas since then. Rockets have also been fired from Gaza towards Israel. The Israeli officials say that hundreds and thousands were running for cover as sirens sound across central Israel on Saturday. Videos show how people are taking shelter for safety and Israel's Iron Dome defense system intercepting missiles above the city. The Israeli army has meanwhile released a video to show an alleged Hamas tunnel near a school in northern Gaza. The army said that the tunnel was 5 meters deep. They also released videos showing troops carrying out missions to neutralize infrastructure in what was said to be the area surrounding Jabalia in northern Gaza. While these are the scenes unfolding in Gaza, this is the scale of devastation both in southern and northern Gaza. The visuals on your screens right now are of Gaza City in the north and Khan Younis in the south. Both of these cities have come under intense bombings since the fighting resumed on Friday. Families can be seen fleeing their homes as they got struck by Israeli strikes. And this is the Al-Ahli hospital in Gaza City. It has often been targeted by the Israeli forces since the beginning of the war. Dead bodies have been arriving here by truck, car and even horse-drawn cart. And what you see is the devastation in southern Gaza. After 2 months of war, civil order is up for a toss. People have now resorted to loot 8 trucks that have been arriving in the territory. People were seen climbing on top of trucks, transporting humanitarian supplies. As per the reports, only 2 fuel trucks and 58 trucks were able to enter Gaza on Saturday. Israel says it has pledged to allow humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. However, it has also urged civilians to evacuate to safe areas as it will continue hitting targets.
And so as soon as the fighting wraps up in northern Gaza, we will continue to destroy all of Hamas's terror infrastructure in Gaza so they can never again hurt our people. We've published an evacuation map, evacuation routes towards safe areas, and we're urging civilians to continue going to these areas, and we're committed to continuing to work with international agencies to ensure the continuation of humanitarian aid, of food, of water, of medicine and shelter to the people of the Gaza Strip.
While the attacks continue, Israel has started mulling post-war arrangements. Well, a senior advisor has told Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that the country will seek a security envelope with special zones that will prevent Hamas from being positioned on its border after the war in Gaza is over.